Hey, Chris. It feels like just yesterday we met on the trade show floor in Minneapolis, but in reality, that was like 2 months ago.
Yeah,
How's everything in your world?
good, busy.
I know last time you told me you were all over the place. You were in Alaska, I believe.
Yep. I've been all over Alaska, Colorado, Texas, Southern California, Tampa, Florida, and then CBC. Actually, I've been in
And
Mexico twice too this year.
oh my gosh, and you're with Cascade Floors, and it's floors that take you all over the place.
Yes, sir. Yep. Sales. I'm the brewery salesman guy, so I do pretty much interface with every brewery, distillery, most of the wineries, but I also do food production facilities too.
So, how in the world did you get involved in the world of flooring?
My grandfather started it in 1969. We became incorporated in 71, and my dad owns it now, and I'm the sales manager slash brewery sales guy.
So, when did you start working for your family's company?
Oh, about 15. So 24 years.
Now, growing up, did you think you were going to dive into the family business of floors, or what made you passionate about jumping into the business?
I didn't want to go to college, so that was an easy choice. I went straight to work and made money.
And at that point in time, were you all interacting with breweries?
Actually, the first brewery we did was a place in Washington, Snipes Mountain Brewing, and then the second brewery we ever did was Full Sail. So I was actually working at Full Sail when I was about 19, 18, 19. And since then, we've done over 362 breweries in 20 states.
Oh my gosh, 362. I like how you have it exact.
Yeah, I think it's 63 will be next week, actually. We're doing another brewery in Texas.
That's awesome. So, why floors? There's a lot of conversations in craft beer professionals about floors, but generally speaking, why should a brewery take so much care and time and invest in the floors of their brew house?
Honestly, breweries are pretty harsh on a lot of things. So technically, like when you get any caustics and stuff on that, concrete won't hold up to it. And the thin sealers that they put on the concrete, once they pour the concrete, once I mean just regular water, I've seen it underneath heat exchangers where the water's mostly lukewarm and it just eats away the concrete. So concrete's really not meant for production facilities, just because it's not going to be chemical resistant and it's super porous, so it's going to attack the concrete super fast if you have any kind of chemistry on the floor.
And looking at the floors in a brewery, when should someone first start thinking about what they're going to use for their floors and the coating and the drain system?
Honestly, the best thing to do is to figure that out before you put the tanks in. And if you have that budgeted, it's perfect to do it before you put the tanks in because we can come in there or whoever can come in there and you just do the floor without anything in the way, and then you can bolt your tanks to the coating through the concrete, and then you're set. But I always tell a lot of people, if you can't afford a good coating and with a reputable company, just brew on concrete for a couple years and call me in a few years because I'll be fixing it probably anyways. I've probably about 40 or 50 breweries that I've met over the years did that, or they did a super thin epoxy coat by themselves, so they really didn't waste very much of their money because it was their own labor, and they pretty much just bought maybe $1,000 worth of epoxy, and it pretty much lasted about as much as it would have if they had somebody do the floor.
So let's say, I buy a brewery and, the floors aren't where they should be. How big a pain is it for someone like yourself to come in and get them up to where the level they should be?
It depends on how much equipment you have in place, but we've done it. Probably 30% of the breweries we've done, or 30% of the areas we've done in the brewing industry, have been with equipment in place. Whether it's fixing somebody else's floors that failed or fixing concrete that's just finally eroded enough to where they're like, all right, we're sick of cleaning this concrete. Let's put something good down. But I mean, it just takes more time, more labor. It's about the same amount of material. I mean, you lose a little bit when you're trying to go under and around things, but the price difference is probably about 10 to 15% more with the equipment in place, just because it takes more labor, and then you got to tape off all the legs, you got to work around things, so it takes 20 or 30% longer to work around stuff than if it was a wide open space.
So I would assume you would encourage breweries to trying to find a way to budget for quality floors from the get go.
Yep, yep. Or like I said, fix them later. We'll gladly come and fix them later.
So let's dive deep into it. What are some of the mistakes you've seen brewers make over your 25 years in the industry?
Honestly, drainage and slope, and just putting a bad epoxy coating down, or choosing a company that, they do like bathrooms and restrooms and stuff like that, and then they come and try to do production facility. Those types of floors that they install in the kitchen, or like in a bathroom or a locker room or something, obviously it's going to hold up a lot longer than in a production facility where they're beating the heck out of everything and using caustics and chemicals and hot water, cold water, hot water, cold water. That stuff's just going to pop right off the concrete. But yeah, the biggest mistakes, honestly, is probably drainage. Just the drains. I've seen a lot of breweries over the years that you just use like some cheap plastic drain that you can get at Home Depot that's really meant for your back patio, not for, a production facility. So the drainage is probably the drain itself is probably the number one mistake I've seen. Second mistake would probably be sloping. A lot of people don't slope the floors properly, or they try to budget, as cheap as they can because they're spending a ton of money on equipment, so they don't get the proper drainage or the slope to the drains, and then they're pushing water with a squeegee or a hose or air or whatever it may be.
Is there a rule of thumb? Let's go back to drains for a sec. For how many drains should be in a brew house?
What's that? Oh, sorry about that. What was that?
Is there a rule of thumb for how many drains should be in a brew house based off, you say, square footage?
Just I like to see people put a long trench drain in. That's usually the best.
And with regard to sloping, what are their tips that you give with regard to what the floor should be sloped at?
1/8 of an inch is minimum. A lot of the bigger places like Deschutes and Stone and New Belgium and stuff, they've actually switched over to about 1/4 inch per foot. So that's that 1/8 of an inch is minimum. That's what's going to get the water to move, but you're going to get some bird baths. So.
And how about epoxy? You touched on it a minute ago, but should we be using epoxy on floors?
Honestly, we do a lot of epoxy, base coat through middle coat to top coat. Probably 30% of the breweries we've done have just a 3-coat epoxy, which is 1/4 inch thick. But most of the breweries we do work for is a urethane base with epoxy top coat. So you get the expansion contraction with the urethane is the same rate as the concrete below it. And then the epoxy is pretty much for lookability. It's still chemical resistant, not as much as the urethane, but the epoxy makes it shinier, look nicer, and if you install a coating properly and get the perfect bond and use a mechanical bond from the prep and a chemical bond from the materials, usually you have no issues. But usually the people that try to skimp on the prep, they're usually only they're relying on the chemical bond instead of both of them together. But if you get both of them together, then the coating shouldn't fail unless you're just beating the heck out of it for, and like keg wash areas where they drop kegs a bunch. I mean, that's only going to take so much abuse. So I always tell people, put it like a rubber mat down so the keg's hitting the rubber mat instead of the ground. And then also you're saving your kegs and your arms and your back.
Now, if you were going to open a brewery yourself, what would you use for your floor coating?
I actually have started a brewery, and then my wife and I just got out of it recently. But yeah, we put a urethane base with an epoxy top coat down, and I mean, it's probably 6 years old now, and it's obviously it was a smaller brewery, but we had no issues. We could scrub stuff and do whatever we wanted to it and put chemicals on. You can leave chemicals on the floor, but I don't recommend it for very long, just because you're just, trying to prevent something that's going to happen if you leave it on there. So I always recommend washing it down. But yeah, urethane base with an epoxy top coat's the best. 1/4 inch thick.
And I know the brewery you just mentioned, your brewery, you had it for 6 years counting. How long does something like that last before you have to repair and, refresh the coating?
Depending on where the coating is, we got floor coatings in the food industry over 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah, they're not the nicest looking thing, but they're not falling apart. But yeah, in like forklift areas, you're going to wear out the floor a lot faster. So there's some places where we've gone and where they move a bunch of tanks and they're like, all right, well, we got to fix all these patches. Let's just recoat the whole floor. But usually you should get at least 10 to 15 years out of a good coating if it's properly installed.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago, just like cleaning the floors and the chemicals that you use. What do you recommend to clean floors? Like what special? I mean, what should we be using? A deck brush? What sort of chemicals? What's your ideal process to keep them nice and clean?
I tell people if they used our floors, you can use a pressure washer on our floors. But yeah, scrubbing. What I always tell a lot of my clients is, okay, when you're scrubbing the outside of the tanks, just let the caustic sit on the ground for a little while, scrub it in, then wash your tanks and the floor all at the same time. And usually it comes out really clean. But a lot of people I've been telling to, you can use a scrub brush and just some Dawn soap. And man, I'll tell you what, it makes the floor look good and it cleans it all up and it's safe for the environment. So it's a win-win, but it breaks up a lot of the grease and the dirt and gets it out of any kind of pores you have, because when we leave a floor, we'll leave the floor with some texture. So there is going to be some areas to catch dirt, but if you're properly cleaning your floors all the time, you'll never see the dirt because it's not non-existent really.
Are there any chemicals or supplies that can hurt the lifespan of a floor?
All of these, all of our epoxy top coats we use in chemical facilities too. So as long as you're cleaning it off, like we do a lot of like chemical rooms for like stone, let's say for stone. We did a chemical room for them and they had to spill and they didn't clean it up for 6 or 8 hours, and the guy called me and he's like, the floor didn't even, nothing even happened on the floor. And I was like, yeah, well, you cleaned it up before a certain amount of time, because it's only going to resist it for so long. But if, as long as you clean it off right away, you're good. But yeah, any kind of chemicals, obviously like the high solution, any kind of high solution chemicals, you want to clean those off right away. But they're pretty much, resistant to any chemical any brewery or food processor is going to use on the floors for sure.
That's fantastic. Now, are there any other mistakes that we haven't mentioned that you see brewers make?
Um, Honestly, drainage and the floors are number one, just because everybody works. You're working up here, you're not looking down, and then everything goes on the floor and everything goes in the drain. So if you're not getting the proper slope and the proper drains, those are always the issues I find first. But there's a lot of people that will install FRP not properly on the walls, and then they get mold and stuff behind them. But honestly, the biggest mistake I see is floors and drains or slope. Those three things, because I mean, anybody can make a tank or a brew house or a fermenter or anything like that. But so those are all. There's always all kinds of options for tanks. But when you don't think about what you're walking on every single day, that's like the floor and the drains, they get the most abuse for sure.
Now, why should a brewery, interact with a company like yourself, someone who's invested in the beer industry versus, just a general person providing floors or a company?
Well, we've been in business for over 50 years and we've got over 2 million square feet in the brewing industry alone. Um, Honestly, our service is number one. Customers are always right. Obviously you're going to have some kind of mistakes here and there as you're installing a floor. A glycol line, or a glycol line drips all over your floor, or a tank accidentally floods something or whatever. But customer service is number one. And we install all of our floors at a 1/4 inch thick. All of the guys that work for us have been trained by us or our manufacturers, and we go over and above our manufacturers specs that they want. So we're the only floor coating company in the country that our manufacturers warranty our floor or their material that we install for 5 years. So you get a 5-year unlimited warranty from us and a 5-year warranty from our manufacturers. So those two together, if you have any issues within 5 years, it's 100% covered. But even after 5 years, there's been multiple places that I'll just go and do a quick patch for them or whatever. Like at a keg washing area, there was a place in Portland we did work for years ago, and they finally had beat a hole in our floor, and they're like, "Hey, we need to get a quote for this." And I was just like, "Give me a couple cases of beer and I'll come patch it for you tomorrow. What do you think?" And so Customer service is number one for us for sure, but we stand behind everything everything we install. I mean, we work in Alaska all the time, Hawaii all the time, and we're out of Oregon. So, but yeah, we've done work all over the country pretty much for the food or beverage industry.
Are there any areas of the brew house that you notice have more wear and tear on the floors than others?
Right in front of the brew house.
Makes sense.
Yeah, right there. And I see some people, they won't put a drain close to the brew house, and then they always regret it because that's where most of your wet processes are. You can always run a hose from your fermenter to the drain, but you're making a lot of mess around the brew house unless it's all fully automated, which a lot of these guys don't have that.
No, I love your focus on customer service. Now, what's something you've learned from your brewery partners over the years?
Just be there when they need you. I mean, try to do everything you can to make them 100% happy. I mean, honestly, the brewing industry has been really good to me because, I mean, word of mouth will destroy you faster than it'll help you. But if you do somebody a good job and they tell all their friends about you, and then, they're like, hey, this guy recommended, oh, yeah, I haven't talked to him for a couple of years. Yeah. It's word of mouth is huge. But if you don't have customer service and you're not available for people to ask questions and everything, then it's, what are you really doing in the industry?
So there's so much innovation in craft beer, and it's fascinating to follow. But like on the floor side of things, what's changed over the past decade? Has anything changed with regard to perhaps your recommendations or strategies or best practices with regards to floors?
Not really. I mean, obviously you've gotten, U Creek came out with urethane years ago. Now there's a bunch of people doing urethanes, but nothing's really changed too much other than, more expensive products, higher end products, easier working products. But in all reality, most of them are all the same. We used to install polyester back in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, which polyester smells like it smells like Bondo on a car, if you've ever done Bondo on a car. So you flood a floor with that stuff and it smells to high heaven. But you can't install that kind of stuff when there's a tasting room on the other side of the wall, or a processor's running chicken or turkey or whatever it may be. So everything we use now is odorless. 95% of the jobs we do now are 100% odorless. So you can literally be installing a floor with a piece of plastic between you and some raw chicken on the other side of it, and it's not going to contaminate any of the food or beer or wine or anything.
So one final question for you, Chris. Say we install the floors ourselves. We don't go the route of hiring someone like you, but we realize that they're not in the shape we need them to be. At what point should we reach out to someone like you, or when is it too late that we could actually cause, structural damage? Is that something that exists?
It can exist, but it's really rare. But I always recommend people, if they're going to try to cut some corners on that, like a floor coating aspect of it, just get a good drain, get a good solid drain in place, and get your slopes to your drain perfect. And then you can always fix that later. But if you're going to start out without doing any kind of floor coating or any tile or whatever it may be that you want, I always recommend trying to do it yourself. So if you have like 1,000 square foot area and you just want to get the floor coated, the best thing you can do is just get some epoxy, and I can always help whoever out with that. I've helped a lot of breweries up in Alaska with that. Just get an epoxy, prep the floor as best you possibly can, and roll a coat of epoxy over the floor with some rollers, maybe broadcast a little bit of sand into it. You're going to save your concrete for longer. And like I said in the beginning, you're really only wasting your own money instead of wasting, hiring somebody that's going to do a crap job. And then in 2 years, it's all falling apart. You'd rather just have it all fall apart because you did it yourself, in my opinion.
So with regard to drains, what's a good resource to learn more about what works and what they should be considering for a brewery?
Honestly, I'm really, really, really happy with slot drains. They have, it's called food safe drains. They're out of Canada, but they do a slot drain too. And the thing is awesome. And if anyone wants some information, I can hook you guys up with the owner, one of the owners of the company. But yeah, you can hook up a hose to it and you can run it straight to the drain. They have a catch basin that catches all of your any kind of screws or washers or any kind of hose ends that might fall down the drain, and you just take the catch basin out and you're good to go.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Now, are there any other recommendations or things you'd like to add?
Say that one more time.
Are there any other recommendations or tips or things you'd like to add for everyone watching?
No, just, I mean, you're walking on the floor every day, so think about that first. Drainage is number one. Get a good drain for sure and good slope, and then move on to the floor coating aspect or just brew on concrete. But if you get your slopes right and your drain set good and it's a good drain, you should be able to even brew on concrete for years before you're going to be sick of cleaning it, and then we can always come and fix it.
Love it. If they're looking to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do so and learn more?
Chris at cascadefloors.com, or check out our website, www.cascadefloors.com.
Awesome, Chris. Well, I look forward to sharing a beer with you at some point. I know you travel a lot, so we'll hope we bump into each other at another point. I'll see you soon.
All
Cheers.
right.
Thanks again.
Thanks. Cheers.